Hey guys, welcome back to another GTD episode. My name is Cameron Selby, and we are going to be breaking down the NFL Championship Weekend DraftKings slates. We're going to do a little bit different of a format this week. If you watched our classic or showdown videos before, we either kind of attack the one specific slate, but then we play everything and post our lines in Discord. Well, there's two games this week, and it's very, very chalky of how everybody's going to build, and that's no fun. And a lot of this, if you're going to be different, it's going to be tournament vibe. It's going to be vibes. I can't really sway you one way or the other, and just hopefully it works out in your favor. So we're going to touch on the main slate a little bit, but we're not going to take too much time into it because it's pretty self-explanatory. But we're also going to attack we're also going to take a first glance at the showdowns, both on the NFC Championship and the AFC Championship games, and we're going to see how we can get different on those slates as well. Obviously, we've played every single one of those, but we rarely touch on showdown specific slates unless they are premier or standalone games. Well, we got 2 games left, so we got the Super Bowl in a couple weeks, and so there's not much to break down other than just knowing that we're going to be breaking and playing everything down. So if you are new to the channel, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what your stands are this week. Who are your Super Bowl predictions, your picks this weekend? Hopefully everybody has made some money so far this playoffs. It's been a very profitable one for us as well. Last week, the Saturday Showdown, we damn near got a first place line for the 5th time in a big contest this year, which would have been incredible, but it still was a very, very successful weekend, and hopefully we continue to finish this year strong. It's been our best year ever, and we're just going to keep on riding this momentum to finish out the year. So I'm excited to break this down. I hope you guys are too. Let's get right into it. All right, so kicking it off, first things first, the totals. First things first, weather-wise, the country is about to get absolutely shit on this weekend, especially in the central area of the country. But these games probably going to be largely unaffected. Looks like the Denver forecast, it's about 42. The Denver forecast, it looks like it'll be in the 20s in that game, whereas in the Seattle and Rams game, it's actually green and just says mild temperature. So I don't expect weather to be at all a factor this past Sunday. Both games were in the snow, a little bit lower scoring games for both of these, or at least offensive output, because Houston, New England ended up putting up some points, but that was not because of the defenses, because the offense's inability to hang on to the ball and allow short fields to be had. This week, I should say it's more the same. The New England Denver total is about 42.5, pretty standard, I would say. And then pretty standard, I would say, considering both defenses are playing lights out right now. And then on the other side of the game, where everybody's going to be attacking and approaching this slate, it's going to be the Rams and Seahawks part 3. They have put some absolute bangers in terms of games out this year. One was the game of the year on Thursday night. That was one of the funnest showdowns of the year. And then before that, it was the 21-19 game where Seattle missed a field goal as time expired. The Rams controlled both of those games largely, but gave one away. The other one they did not, and they hung. The other one they did not, and they hung on to win. So I'm really excited to see both of these games, especially the NFC Championship. But yeah, I'd say let's get right into it. There is a big elephant in the room, and that is Bo Nix and his ankle. He is out for the year. Last week, largely for the most part, my theory of these quarterbacks putting lower totals and it wasn't going to just be an offensive juggernaut for everybody came pretty much true. Everybody else was hung below 20 points other than Bo Nix and Josh Allen that specific game. But Bo Nix played lights out, 3 touchdowns, nearly 300 yards in a overtime performance. But then second last play of the game, broke his ankle and immediately was ruled out for the season. I thought it was pretty strange that they didn't keep those cards close to the vest. You gave a full week for New England to prepare as if they're playing Jared Stidham, not Bo Nix, which that's neither here nor there. But regardless, on this slate, we're going to just start off with his backup, Jared Stidham. Jared Stidham has not started a game since 2023. He has only started 4 games in his career. All of them were at the end of the year in the 2022 and 2023 seasons. One was with the Raiders, the other was with the Denver Broncos. It would pretty much go how most people would expect a backup to go, with not much starting experience. The last 3 games, averaging right around 14 to 14.5 fantasy points. He's had 1 touchdown every single game. He's had some turnovers and not really flirting with the 300-yard bonus. with the exception of his first start in the end of the 2022 season. Technically, this was New Year's Day, so 2023, where he had a 31 fantasy point day, had 365 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But that, again, was with the Las Vegas Raiders. And that was also a million years ago in terms of football years. So the biggest thing I take away from this game is that I don't expect this to be a blowout. I expect Denver to hang around. I think they have an outside shot of winning this game. It's going to be really hard to convince yourself to play a Jared Stidham. That said, he is by far the lowest owned quarterback. Everybody else is right around 30% owned. Sam Darnold a little higher, a couple others a little lower, but he's right around 9 to 10% owned, showing slight positive leverage. So I think his path is just everybody else sucking, and because you're able to save a 1,800 against the Stafford, a 15 against the Drake, of 1,000 against the Sam Darnold, that is how he pays off. It's not from him having a 20-point plus performance. That's not my expectation. That's not most people's expectation. But if you do play a lot of lines, and this is a 2-game slate where pretty much everybody's going to try to do one thing, I would say I'm open to the idea if you're going to play multiple lines. I haven't decided if I'm going to just stick with one specific line on this contest or if I'm going to play a few. The last few weeks, I've been just made the stand on one single quarterback, and for the most part, that was worked out. But that was Josh Allen. I'm not taking a stand on Jared Stidham, but if I am playing multiple lines and I want a second quarterback, I think I can talk myself a little bit into Jared Stidham because there's just not a ton of value on this slate. But going back to the top, the 2 main ones we want to discuss and talk about, it is Matthew Stafford having a big dud performance this past week, and it mainly just comes down to he's never involved in the rushing game once again, and it just comes down to if he's involved with passing touchdowns, and they scored 2 touchdowns. Both of them were 1-yard handoffs. Both of them were 1-yard handoffs to Kyren Williams. That really bummed us out on the all-weekend line that did the best for us because at the very end of the day, we took a stand on DeAndre Swift. And I don't think that line would have specifically just single swap to Kyren Williams would have been able to afford that. But it was a massive difference between the two. And so Kyron's having a 25-point day. That was a real bummer. Was hoping that Stafford would have a little bit more juice and be involved on some scores, but he was not. That said, though, going against Seattle, last time we saw him play was absolutely flawless. 450 yards, 3 touchdowns, 50 pass attempts damn near in Seattle, 34-point day. And the time before that, 2 touchdowns as well. They just were playing from so far ahead. I think they were up 2 to almost 3 scores in that game. I think it might have been 21-3, if I remember correctly. So they were not involved. But either way, neither here nor there, he's averaging roughly 300 yards, 5 touchdowns, no turnovers. And to me, he's the lead dog on how I want to approach this slate. In terms of against the other quarterbacks, it's actually surprising to me that Stafford's the 3rd highest owned quarterback on this slate. I wasn't expecting that. I would have thought that people would be going with him. He's kind of, on 2-game slates, you're not really going to have a lot of positive leverage anywhere, but I'd rather play him, if price didn't matter, over everyone. I'm actually picking the Rams to win this game and go to the Super Bowl. And they were my preseason pick to get there. They were my right before the playoffs pick, but I actually picked them to win it all, and I have not wavered from that. I still have belief in that. I know they struggled against Carolina. They struggled against Chicago, but in a fair weather game and environment against a team that they've controlled twice and they know they let one get away last time they did play this team, I expect them to come pretty buttoned up, and maybe this isn't a 38-37 final and overtime kind of game that we saw on that Thursday night showdown, but I still expect a really solid performance from the Rams at the very least, especially offensively. Drake May, though, obviously he's showing some really positive leverage right now, right around 30% owned. Like I said, the 3 quarterbacks at top are pretty spread out in terms of ownership. There's not a huge lean on one or the other. And Drake May, I think if price didn't matter, is the safest option. And it mainly comes to do with the fact that he can run the ball. The problem is he can't hold on to the ball right now. He has 6 fumbles and 2 interceptions over the last 2 playoff games. Lost only 3 of those 6 fumbles. But damn, you're not protecting the ball. And a guy that was a top 2 MVP candidate that everyone wants to push like he had the better overall season than Stafford. He did not. It wasn't close until the very end, and this is not a December award. But regardless, this is a DFS slate, and this just comes down to he's a reasonable $6,000, which I don't think he has been that cheap since way back in week 6 against the New Orleans Saints. Other than that, I'm fine with it. The thing is, he has to be involved on multiple touchdowns. I expect this to be a kind of grinded out game anyways. It's not like you can pinpoint one way of a huge weakness of Denver's defense to where they're going to give up a ton of points. That said, though, they did allow 30 to Buffalo this past weekend, and that was in spite of Josh Allen turning the ball over 4 times. I think I think Denver's defense is gettable, especially with a running style quarterback, or especially with the quarterback that has the ability to scramble and do things on with his legs. The thing is, just makes you a little uncomfortable having to stack, because we've been saying that all year when we've played Drake May, is how do I stack him? And the answer is you don't necessarily have to worry about that on a 2-gamer. I don't really care. You're by default going to fall into a New England skill player. Probably every single team, you're probably going to default into one of these guys. And so I expect him to be a guy I'm interested in. I'm going to cross off Sam Darnold. And the reason I'm doing that, I'm not saying it because he's going to choke or anything of that nature. I hate the fact that he's the highest owned quarterback. And the reason he's the highest owned quarterback is just solely because he's the cheapest of the big 3. And everybody's going to try to fit things in. He's shown about 34% owned. And again, that's not a huge, crazy amount higher than a Drake May or Stafford. But if you are playing a big single entry contest or a low amount of entry contest, that just is going to inflate his ownership to where he maybe approaches 40 to 45%. And just no thank you. Recently, he has not done anything to be remotely close to having that high of ownership. For the last 5 games, he's been held under 12 fantasy points. Recently, he's been playing with an oblique injury, and that is concerning to me. I think that is really going to take away his ability to scramble and run. And that kind of showed, which I know they won 41-6. So it's not like they had to do anything of that nature, but didn't have a single carry. And he only had 17 pass attempts. Zach Charbonnet went down, and instead of them saying, okay, well, we got to be a little bit more balanced because our goal line running back is now out for the year, they just said, all right, Kenneth Walker, you're the guy, which is what he always should have been. And they just fed him, had a big day, and he was in the optimal line for good reason with 38 fantasy points. So Sam Darnold, last 2 times he did play the Rams, he had a 4 turnover day the first time. And then this past time, in a comeback effort, had 21, which was a pretty solid day. But he was, for the most part, off his game. He's had 6 turnovers in the 2 games against the Rams. And I'm not saying that he's going to have a turnover-prone game today. I just don't think this is going to be a close to a ceiling performance for him. I think this is a 10 to 15 fantasy point day. And if they're going to have a shot of winning this game, it's going to be grinding a 30-touch Kenneth Walker performance, which everybody is expecting anyways, based on ownership. But I have no interest whatsoever playing Sam Darnold. That doesn't mean that I'm fading JSN or I'm fading the entire pass game. I'm just not interested at all at playing Sam Darnold. I would rank him below Jarrett Stidham. If I'm going to be playing multiple lines, which I don't, again, know if I'm officially doing yet, but if I'm playing multiple quarterbacks, I'm least interested in Sam Darnold right now, and that's purely an ownership thing. I don't think it's a ceiling game. I just don't like anything about what the current momentum of playing him right now would entail. Running back wise, it's pretty self-explanatory what everybody's going to do, and everybody's going to play Kenneth Walker. 83% owned projected, and that is a massive tournament. So if you're playing a $50 single entry, $100 single entry, or whatever kind of single entry or small contest, he might be 95% owned. And basically 5% of people are just praying for an injury, and that is the only reason that they don't have him. Just let others pay the rake. Let everybody else that doesn't play him pay the 8 to 10% that DraftKings usually takes from contests. I'm disappointed that they didn't put him all the way up at 8,000. They knew that Zach Charbonnet wasn't going to be available for this game. There's no way that they would have known that he's out for the year. He tore his ACL. Long road to recovery. This should have been an $8,000 play. Would have at least brought him down to like 55, 60% owned. And that in turn would have allowed other receivers and high-end plays be lower owned. But because he's 6,200, everybody's going to play him. I think it's a complete misprice by like $2,000. Last time he played the Rams, 28 fantasy points, only 14 touches, but still had 164 yards in the score. And the previous time he played them, this was in a comeback effort. Had a 20 fantasy point day, over 100 all-purpose yards on 19 touches in that game. Both of those games had Zach Charbonnet. This one does not. He hasn't had many ceiling performances this year, but in the 4 times that he's been over 20 fantasy points, 2 of them have come against the Rams in both opportunities he's had to play them. So you're playing Kenneth Walker and figure it out from there. Kyren Williams, like I said, the big day this past week, they just really rode him into the ground. 4 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. Big day, 27.7 fantasy points. $6,500 the last 2 times he played Seattle. Very, very inefficient. Very, very inefficient the last game. But he did have a welcoming 6 targets, 29 opportunities. Just 85 yards, no touchdowns. You're not going to have a big day if you're not scoring touchdowns, especially if it is unfortunately the 37 fantasy. When your offense is scoring 37 points and you're not involved in any scores, you're probably just not going to work out in terms of that investment. But the previous game, much more efficient that game, and he also 16.6 fantasy points. Based on his last performance, I'm surprised that his ownership is below 50%. But right now he's shown around 30 to 40 or 35 to 40% owned. I think that's pretty solid leverage. He's had a successful game from them before. The other one was volume-based, but just no scoring on touchdowns. And this past week, when he had a big day, 5 targets is really the number that he is inconsistent on getting targets. Sometimes he'll just have 1 or 0, and sometimes he'll have the 5 or 6. And so if he can get closer to that 4 to 6 targets on top of his probably 15 to 20 carries, 6,500 is not bad. The thing is, he's just not going to naturally fall into lines, and that's maybe why his ownership might be down a little bit. But if I can find a way to spend 600 more on him over RG Harvey, who is right now 61% owned, I am more than fine and open to that. RJ Harvey this past week in a game where they were playing from ahead in a good matchup after Buffalo has just been, after Buffalo's been pretty inconsistent defending running backs and the run game in general, and he had 6 carries. I remember watching because he was in 2/3 of my lines, and it was just a natural bring back on the other side of this game. And there were 7 carries that happened in the first quarter-ish. I think it was the first entire quarter. He had 0, and he was the starting running back. Bo Nix had 5, which I know now Jared Stidham, now being the quarterback, that opens up more opportunities and carries for these said running backs. But it's not like he's ran away with a bunch of opportunities since J.K. Dobbins went down. He's only approached 20 touches. He's only eclipsed 20 touches 1 time. He has been efficient scoring touchdowns, which is a good sign. But he has been inefficient in terms of yards per touch on the ground, especially considering the fact that this is one of the better offenses overall in football, and he's just not really doing much on the ground. It more comes down to if he's scoring touchdowns or if he's putting targets down, which he pretty much has been consistent on. But I'm just not necessarily interested. Woody Marks is coming off a game where he had 13 touches for 13 yards and a fumble. I know Houston's offense isn't nearly as in the same ballpark as Denver's offense, but I just don't think the ownership is worth it. I think all these guys are obviously in bad matchups. They're the Final Four teams, and it makes sense why. But I think the tournament approach is basically taking a low-owned running back down low and praying for a backup running back touchdown. Jaleel McLaughlin, Tyler Beatty combined for about 33% of the snaps this past week. Neither one was touching the ball a ton. But maybe one falls into the end zone for a touchdown or has a couple of catches and has about 7 fantasy points. But if everybody else is busting up top and nobody other than Kenneth Walker is flirting with the 20-point day, I don't think it really hurts you to take chances on these guys. Blake Corum, until last week where Kyren was the hot hand, had at least 11 opportunities in 4 of the last 5 games, 5 of the last 6 games, and was pretty solid at scoring touchdowns, had a couple targets in there. This past week, like I said, it just wasn't really working out. But because of the fact that he just had a small day, whereas Kyren had a really big day, right now that just means he's going to be about 5% owned. And on a 2-gamer slate, 5%, I'm not opposed to that. Like, Travion Henderson, people want to play. I understand he's had explosive plays, but since he's been in the playoffs, 3 yards a carry or less. Last week, I know they're playing tough defenses, but Denver's number 1 against running backs. So he's a 21% owned guy that is averaging 3 yards a touch, not being much of a pass catcher. And I mean, Ramondre's really been the more consistent option. And even when Ramondre went out and we thought he might have been done for the game against Houston, that was the opportunity for Travion to just run away with it. And he was just okay. And then Ramondre came back in and got most of the touches the rest of the game, where he finished with 20, an inefficient 20 touches. But Ramondre is my preference between New England running backs. Ramondre is actually the highest leverage play. I think in terms of ranking Harvey, Stevenson, because everybody's playing Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker is clearly number 1. But between RJ Harvey, Stevenson, and Kyren, which are all bottom 5 matchups in the NFL this year against running backs, I think I rank it Ramondre, Kyren, and then a gap to RJ Harvey. I do want to mention one thing, though, and we got to scroll down. J.K. Dobbins, I'm not saying to play him, but he is returned to practice this week. He's been limited in back-to-back sessions. I'm recording this as a Friday morning, so who knows if he's going to even be active or play. But he's a minimum price running back. Nobody's going to play him. And to me, if he is active and plays, I would be shocked if they didn't activate him and then not give him the ball 5 or 6 times. So if he has the ball 5 or 6 times and he's bare minimum price running back, barely anybody's going to play him, I'm intrigued. Because I think the RB2 position is the one true way you can get different, because otherwise everybody's really trying to mix and match the wide receiver 2s and 3s and be different. There's not really many places to be different this week, I will say. Receiver-wise, Puka Nacua, JSN. You're trying to jam them both. Can it happen with Kenneth Walker? Absolutely. Do you feel comfortable doing it? Not necessarily. But I'll show you the easy way that a lot of people are going to try to do it in a little bit. But the main thing is, at minimum, you have to play one. And I would probably more than likely try to play both. If you think it is a Sam Darnold, you are feeling the vibes that I am about Sam Darnold having an okay day, and it's not really going to lead to much, well, maybe JSN doesn't need to be in your line. That if it comes down to it, I probably would rather play Puka than JSN. But the last time JSN has played the Rams, both games, pretty standard targets. I think he had 13 opportunities in each game. Yeah, 13 targets here, 12 targets and a carry here. One game he didn't score a touchdown but went over 100 yards. The other one he did score the game-winning touchdown and just under 100 yards. Either way, 23 fantasy points. Not many other people have this upside. I feel much better about playing him than others, but there's a reason why he's $2,000 more than these other wide receiver ones. But yeah, Puka Nacua, though, the last time he played them, this was the second round of best ball, and for good reason. He probably made you move on if you had him. He had 225, 12 catches, 2 touchdowns, 49.5 fantasy points. The time before that, had just a solid day of 7 for 75. Didn't score a touchdown. Actually lost his only fumble of the season against them. And I'm not saying this is a good matchup, and I'm not saying he is going to be close to this number. But even a 20 fantasy point day, I don't see how that's not optimal. I really don't see how, even if he had, as long as it's not last week where he just goes 5 for 56, but at the same time, the other big spins, JSN, Christian McCaffrey, all 3 of them actually were under 12 fantasy points. So none of them panned out. And I don't even remember if Puka was optimal. But this week, if he has a 15 fantasy point day, like how many receivers are really going to go off this week? I'm not necessarily certain, but I would be highly shocked if he wasn't a part of this optimal line. He and Jason both over 60% optimal opportunity. Both Puka and Jason over 63% optimal rate right now. I just have a hard time getting away from one or the other. I'm going to try my hardest to play both. But if you're going to do that, most people are going to as well. You have to leave salary on the table or be different in some way, shape, or form. Ante returned against Carolina, had 13 targets, and that was very promising. But no touchdowns, just had an okay day. Then we ran it back this past week, and I played one line with him. I ended up going against the Rams on the Sunday only showdown, and good thing I did. He only caught 2 passes for 24 yards, and his price went down because of that. He didn't play the last time Puka absolutely went bananas, but the time before that, he had 1 catch, 1 yard, 1 touchdown on 8 targets. I think it comes down to how you feel about him versus Diggs versus Sutton, and I probably rank him third in that group. The thing is, that might be the same thing. I might rank him third in that group. The problem is, the optimizer I'm looking at shows him as one of the most positive leverage receivers on the slate. I just don't know if I'm going to fit that because of the fact that I need to save money somewhere. So I'm probably going to opt to go against Devontae this week. Stephon Diggs has had an okay playoff so far. 2 catches, 16 yards, was not really involved at all in their first win. And then the second win, caught a touchdown right before the half. 4 for 40 is not going to be crazy. It comes down to if somebody scores, and I can't always predict if somebody's going to score or have a strong day. But both of them are capable. I know New England had a stretch this year where wide receiver ones were really taking them out against the Chargers, who don't really have a true wide receiver one, and then Houston, who was without Nico Collins. That's a weird sample, especially going against. But at the same time, now you're playing a backup quarterback. So New England's really lucking into matchups and injuries and stuff like that throughout the playoffs and the runs that they've had. But Cortland Sutton had a really rough day. It started off just Bo Nix was the only receiver that he couldn't hit wide open. And then later in the game, he had a couple crucial drops. Salvaged to get 4 for 53. I think he only had 1 catch going into the fourth quarter and had a really solid few snags to kind of set them up. And in the overtime, though, I think he had back-to-back targets that either were dropped or were catchable passes. I think because of that, less people want to play him. He's actually, in terms of these 3 I just mentioned, the lowest owned of the bunch. But all 3 of them are positive leverage. So if you can find a way to go boom, boom, and pick one of them and still afford a line that you don't want to throw up, I'm all for it. I just don't know if you can. I think it comes down to the decision that you're going to make a receiver is, do you want to just play 1 and then 2 of these guys? Or do you want to try to fit the top 2 and then maybe fit 1? That's really what it's going to come down to. And I think I probably side with trying to fit Puka and JSN as much as I can. The other crucial thing that we're going to have to monitor is the Denver receivers. Troy Franklin left the game due to a hamstring injury. He has not caught a pass in the last couple of weeks. And I'm surprised that he was even limited on Wednesday, but limited on both sessions. Nobody's going to play him at $4,700. So I don't mind him. Pat Bryant, another interesting one. This is his second concussion in the last 2 months because he was knocked out. I think it was the Jacksonville game. Yeah, the Jacksonville game. The last play essentially of the game where the game was out of reach and they were pinned deep in their own territory, and then Bo Nix threw him a hospital ball, and then he missed a game after that. But now, after his concussion, he was peppered with targets on the first drive, had 3 catches on the first drive, and then on the third one was concussed. And he's been a full practice participant as of yesterday on Thursday. So if he gets cleared, I probably at this point would prefer Pat Bryant over Troy Franklin, even if both play. But I just would be shocked if he did. If both are out, lock and load Marvin Mims. He has not been playing a ton of snaps throughout the season, and we took the stand that Troy Franklin was going to be the wide receiver 2 this year, and for the most part, we were right in terms of having ceiling performances for a best ball slate, but Marvin Mims just did not play a ton. But then I think he only had 2 games the entire year where he was over 50% of the snaps, and then in this playoff game, not only was he the hot hand, but he also had to step up because 2 guys went down in the game, and he played 65% of the snaps, all 8 of his targets, 93 yards, and a late touchdown. Was very low owned. I think he was like 1%. And now, because of that most recent thing, that's going to be on a lot of people's minds when they try to find cheap receivers. And right now, it looks like it just kind of comes down to if both play, I still think he's in play. But that just lowers his floor by a whole lot. I would expect one of those two to be out. And if they're both in, I'd be pretty shocked. But like I said, even if they do, I would just make it be like, okay, well, that just means his ownership's going to be lower and it's going to be easier to get overweight. Rashid Shaheed's going to be a name that is going to catch a lot of people's attention by default. Since he's been traded to Seattle, he's made more of a mark as a return guy and a end-around guy than a actual receiver. Just the gadget plays is what really has happened. The last time he did play the Rams in the comeback effort, he did have a punt return touchdown to help them come back and win that game. But again, he had no catches on that. He had a 30-yard rush. Last week, didn't catch either target, but had 27 rushing yards on 2 carries. And then before that, I don't think the last matchup they played, he was not on the team yet. But it just really is, he's not been much of a receiver, and it just comes down to, can a punt return get you there? And to me, I'm not going to make a gamble on that being the reason. But there's not really a bunch of options down here that make a ton of sense. Kayshon Boutte has been pretty consistent. He's led the team in receiving yards in both of their playoff games so far. Caught a one-handed, really nice touchdown against Houston this past week. But again, 5 targets, 4 targets. He's making the most of them. But at the same time, ownership will be there. 27% owned. Isn't terrible for a 2-game slate. But I think the winner, the Millie Maker, whatever the first place in this big contest that you're going to play, it's going to come in this range. And I don't know who that is. It could be Cooper Kupp, who still is on the field and plays a ton of snaps. This past week was $3,500, 5 targets, caught all 5 for 60 yards, 11 fantasy points. That outscored Rashid Shaheed. But because Rashid Shaheed scored a crazy kick return touchdown to start the game, people want to correlate it with Seattle's defense. Whatever. Half the ownership of Rashid Shaheed, and he's on the field a ton more. Rashid, you're looking for the big play, but last week, 42% of the snaps, only 2 targets. Cooper Kupp caught all 5 of his targets. He's been pretty steady with getting 3 to 4 targets every single game since week 10. And even in the 2-target game he had against Arizona in a blowout, he still had 74 receiving yards, which was the most in this stretch. He's not going to catch a crazy amount of passes, but he's on the field. He's 3,800. I'm interested in a Cooper Kupp. Demario Douglas caught the first touchdown of the game. In terms of New England snap share, he was on the field 26%. Efton Chisholm actually outsnapped him. And then there's also a possibility, or an outside chance, Matt Collins returns this week. I don't know if I'm going to side with that one over a Cooper Kupp. Al Williams also 34% of the snaps this past week. Didn't catch a single one of his 3 targets. Probably no thank you. Jordan Whittington had a couple of catches on the first drive of the game and then didn't really do anything. Snap-wise, he played 60%. 60% of snaps. And Kanata Mumfield played 46. Xavier Smith, who was playing a ton, and he was a lot of people's like $1,200 showdown darling, played 6%. So because Jordan Whittington's on the field, I'm open to that at $3,100. I think that's a sneaky way to do some stacks with Matthew Stafford. I don't think he's going to be crazy high owned. It's not like he's going to project a ton, but even if he scores you 2 fantasy points, but he allows you to get both of these guys, I don't think that's really going to hurt you in one way, shape, or form. Kanata Mumfield caught a couple passes as well. Hasn't really had ceiling performances outside of like the 3 for 8 targets, but that was a game that Devontae Adams missed. So I'm my gut feeling says one of these 3K guys get you there, and I just don't know who that is. But my favorite two are probably Cooper Kupp, Jordan Whittington. Shout out to Cuero, very local high school of us. We used to play that a ton when I was back in high school. Tight end wise, Hunter Henry's going in my line. Denver has not been good against tight ends recently. Has given up 100-yard games. They've been giving up a ton of performances. Dalton Kincaid this past week had 20 fantasy points against him. Dawson Knox had a couple of receptions. My problem is Hunter Henry's floor is just always inconsistent. I've always liked him as a tight end, but it just always feels like, why does he have so many constant like one catch games? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't compute. But I think he's live for a touchdown. Denver, that's been the weakness of this recent stretch of games when they've given up points. They gave up like a 10 for 106 day to Zach Ertz. I remember, like, outside of games that people just don't use tight ends, like even Luke Musgrave, who was barely used after Tucker Kraft went down, had like 4 for 52. Travis Kelce with Chris Aludicun had more than 50% of the possible receiving yards for Kansas City that day. Last week, like I said, Dalton Kincaid went off. So he's going to go in my line. It just comes down to, do I want to do double tight end again? And I don't necessarily know if I know the answer to that yet. The key is figuring out the Rams tight ends. If you do, I think a lot of people are going to naturally play some Rams tight ends to correlate, because it's easier to correlate a tight end and Puka than going Devontae and Puka in this line while trying to afford the big names up top. AJ Barnes is going to get about 38%. Hunter Henry is going to be about 60% owned. And I'm just going to eat that chalk there and decide if I want a second tight end. Tyler Higbee, I was excited to play last week, and then he played 8 snaps. Once again, caught a deep pass, but that was his only catch of the game. His price went down as a result. And all of these guys, it is a decent matchup for tight ends. It is actually a decent matchup for tight ends. And their first matchup, Stafford didn't have a ton of completions, so I think Parkinson caught 1 for 23. Tyler Higbee was out. The next matchup, Tyler Higbee was out again, but Colby Parkinson caught 2 passes. Terrence Ferguson had 3 for 33 and a touchdown, and even Davis Allen caught 2 for 34. So if that was one player, that absolutely worked out. I think if it comes down to it, Parkinson might be my favorite, and it's just because he's been on the field the most for the Rams pretty consistently. I thought because of the vet status and Tyler Higbee playing over 50% the previous 2 weeks since he returned from injury, that would lean to be him, because that's what the case was last year when he was coming into the playoffs being injured. He caught 1 or 2 touchdowns against the Eagles. I remember him having a big day because I played him as a tournament play that day. Before that, he had a really big day and immediately was involved as soon as he came back, but that was not the case this past week. Kobe Parkinson still played 68% of the snaps, which was by far the most on the team, had 7 targets, and his price went down. And the even stranger part is that he's less than 20% owned. So that might be my favorite tight end if I'm going to double tight end. Either way, I'm playing Hunter Henry no matter what. I'm just going to take the stand and just eat that chalk and find ways to get different. And if that comes down to playing him and him, I'm going to be fine with that. AJ Barner, he's been a tush-push guy. He didn't have any targets this past week. He was pretty chalky, and he's still somewhat chalky again this week, being about 40%. I'm going to be annoyed if that works out, but I'm going to take the stand and just say I'm not going to play the second highest owned tight end with the first highest owned tight end. That's just not what I'm going to do. And then let's build some lines real quick. Starting off, Denver, too cheap. I think that was disrespectful that they just jumped him down. New England's been turning the ball over. They've been getting sacked a ton. But guess who leads the league in sacks? I'm going to just take the stand that New England's not going to drop 30 points like Buffalo did. And even if that happens, Denver still forced 5 turnovers, 3 sacks, and they've become a bend don't break defense towards the end of the year, but can still get defensive stats. 2,500 just opens up a ton. I'm probably going to stay away from both Seattle and the Rams. I expect that to be a 27-24 kind of game. So it comes down to, can you afford Patriots? If you do, awesome. 3 straight games, at least 12 fantasy points. But if you don't, I'm picking the Patriots to win, but this could still be a 20-17 or 20-10 kind of game. And even if Denver's on the losing side of that, they can still get you 5 fantasy points that you need. And as long as you don't have multiple defenses scoring over 15 points like we had last week, I think you could be more than fine with Denver at 25. I'm going to do a double. I'm going to do a triple with Matthew Stafford. I'm going to go all the way down to Jordan Whittington and put Kobe Parkinson in there as well, in addition to Hunter Henry, like I mentioned. You're going to play Kenneth Walker, and I'm going to try to squeeze in a JSN, and you got 6,600 left. I don't know if I want a quad stack. I really don't. If you did, I might take away Kobe Parkinson, and I don't really want to go up to Demario Douglas. So it might be just I leave some salary on the table, take the stand that I need a New England skill player, 600 remainder. You got a triple stack. You got the double bring back. Heavily invested in that second game in the NFC Championship. Don't have any Denver players, but you got their defense. I highly advise leaving some salary on the table, getting different this week. Let's do a New England build real quick, and then we'll go over to the showdowns. So once again, I'm going to try to fit in both of these guys and then see what happens. So we're going to do that. I know it's usually contradictory to do doubles against the defense, but it is a showdown slate, so sue me. And then you don't have a lot of money for anything else. If you go down to Jordan Whittington again, that leaves you enough for a cheap backup running back. I don't know if I could do that. So I might have to fade one of Puka and JSN, and I'm going to side with JSN if that's going to be the case. Second running back, put him in. Let's say this time we do go to a Kyron Williams this time. I don't mind if you go with Ramondre the second time because he is apparently a PPR back now. And then the last two in, you could probably go cheap and then try to afford a Sutton again. So $3,500, that's enough for Kobe Parkinson. Perfect. The problem is zero salary on the table. I put Kyle Williams in. Kobe Parkinson. You got 3 Rams. You got 1 Seahawk. You got a Denver guy as a bring back. Like, that's fine. If you wanted to go down from Parkinson to either another tight end or get up to Devontae, you can. I don't know if I necessarily want to. I'm not even going to build a Sam Darnold build. I'm going to do a quick Denver build just for the fun of it. But if you're doing that, you better play the big guys up top. I'm not getting weird with a Jared Stidham. I'm only doing it to alleviate the toughness to get all 3 of those guys. But you're starting your build with all 3 of those players. Probably just going to still play Hunter Henry. And then who is going to be the reason that Denver has a successful day? I'm going to put Marvin Mims in there as the second guy. And then last guy in, I know I mentioned him earlier, but he's low owned, Blake Corum, as a secondary piece for the Rams. Maybe he gets back to his 10, 11 opportunities and he falls into the end zone one time. And he's low owned. That's a way to get different. And the way that you can play with $100 on a 2-gamer and still be very different is having the lowest owned quarterback, a very low owned backup running back, and then you actually have double Denver receiver, which I don't think as many people will do. So that's pretty much the way I'm going to approach this slate. Kicking it over to the showdown, we're going to just do a quick speed build. Don't forget to opt into these boosted winnings. This one is like a 25% boost up to $50 on a place. They have those available all week, so be sure to click on those if you can. The biggest thing with this one is finding the right captain, and I really don't have the answer to that unless you're just going to by default put Drake May in there. The past 2 games, he's by default been, I think, the optimal captain. It mainly just comes down to no one else was scoring points. I think New England's defense might have been at the optimal actually in this specific game. But I remember the other one where 19 points isn't crazy, but no one else really vaulted with that. I think the way that I like getting different is maybe going Hunter Henry at captain. He's very expensive at 78, but his ownership might be low enough to where you can still be over the field by just playing him at flex. Captain wise, let's try to put Drake May in and see what we can do. Jared Stidham, I know I flirted with the idea on a main, but that's only to afford other guys. I'm not playing him for $9,000 on this showdown slate. I don't think I want RJ Harvey for that cheap either. And it just Ramondre Stevenson. I did mention earlier J.K. Dobbins being on IR, being minimum price on the main slate, well, he's 4,000 on the Showdowns. I'm not playing him. It's not worth the risk to me at $4,000. Max, same thing. Even if he hypothetically returned, but I think it might start like that. You can try to fit in Stephon Diggs, and then going down here, I think Denver's defense might be low owned, and it might be a little weird playing New England or Denver's defense with them. But if they have 5 fantasy points at $3,400, like that is not going to kill you by any stretch of the imagination. Lil Jordan Humphrey, in terms of RotoWire, is projecting as the highest value as of this moment. He caught a touchdown last week, had 5 targets. And he played a lot of snaps, but that was a lot because of both guys going down. So if either one of those guys are out, maybe that inflates his role a little bit to where $2,800 kind of really opens up the books to where you can afford that. 700 remainder, 4 on New England, 2 on Denver side. But if you didn't want to do that and you wanted to be a little bit more balanced, maybe you played Courtland Sutton, and that's enough for a kicker. Will Lutz, 17 fantasy points this past week. They usually high volume of kicks, and if Denver actually moves the ball this week, it's more likely than not they're just going to have kicking opportunities over scoring in the touchdown. So I think I like him a lot. Andy Borregales, sure, but I mean, I think I'll side with a Will Lutz if I'm going to say that. So that might be a first look. Again, be in the Discord for our final looks. I'll probably just play one line, find ways to get different, leave salary on the table. But my stands are probably going to just be, I want Hunter Henry in my line, and then Drake May either at flex or captain. I don't think you can fade him on this slate. Denver Broncos is my tournament play, and then we'll see who our last guys in are for that one. And then the final showdown. This one will be interesting because there should be a lot of points in this one. So can you afford that is the question, because I want to really, really bad. It's just very, very expensive. If you did that, you're going to have to. But then again, if you did that, you're fading Kenneth Walker. Man, oh man, that's such a tough call. I might be fading JSN on this slate. Kenneth Walker at captain makes a lot of sense. He might be one of the most popular captains, though. So if you do leave some salary on the table, is what I'd recommend. If you want to talk about the IR guy that could possibly return, I don't even think I mentioned this, but Elijah Arroyo, full participant, 1,600, a little bit more reasonable. I just don't know if he'll even play, and even if he does, how involved will he be? Last time, there was one showdown that he did play that, and it wasn't against the Rams, but he had a big deep pass. There was one showdown where he did play. I think it was this Arizona game where he caught 2 for 44 and then had 2 red zone targets, but he was less than $1,000, and it was a very fun tournament play that we ended up getting right. But he didn't catch a pass in his first matchup, didn't play the second matchup. I think it comes down to playing Jordan Whittington. If he plays as high of a snap count that he did, I'm interested at $2,200. And then after that, $5,500 left. I mean, both defenses, because both defenses are decent plays. The Rams, I would expect to be my preferred option. 1, because I'm picking the Rams, and 2, because I don't know why they're $3,600. The first time that, like I said, they played the Seahawks, forced 4 interceptions from Sam Darnold, 9 fantasy points there. And then the second time had a 6 fantasy point day in spite of getting 38 dropped on them, and it's because they had 3 turnovers, 4 sacks. So they've gotten turnovers and sacks against this team, and I don't expect this to be a 40-37 kind of game. Much higher scoring than the first game, but 27-24 is my range, and if that's the case, $3,600 I think is a reasonable price for defense, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be targeting that. But if you wanted to be more balanced, playing double kicker is fine. Playing AJ Barner is, I mean, he was chalky on one slate. I don't know how chalky he'll be on this one, but 4,800 isn't terrible. Cooper Kupp, I was a lot more interested when he was closer to minimum price on the main than $4,400, but I guess that makes sense if you wanted to do that in a revenge game, NFC Championship. Like, that makes some sense. But Kobe Parkinson, $3,400 is really, really cheap for the role. I mentioned he's probably my second favorite tight end on the main slate, so don't mind that whatsoever. I might find a way to just get up to Puka, put Kenneth Walker at the flex, and then $6,400 last guy in. It's really easy to leave salary on the table if you can stomach that. You have a triple stack for the Rams, bring back with Kenneth Walker, who's chalky, and then their kicker, who is one of the leading scorers. You see the upside that he has in big games where they score a lot of field goals. Last week, they just didn't kick field goals, really. They just kept scoring touchdowns. And so he still had 11 fantasy points, but I expect the Rams to be a little bit more. I expect the Rams defense to get more stops than what San Francisco was allowed, what San Francisco provided against the Seahawks this past week. But one game he had, 4 field goals? Yeah, he had 4 or 5. The last one was the game winner that he ended up missing, but had 15 fantasy points. The one before that, that was a game when they were playing comeback. They were doing 2-point conversions, so it didn't work out game script-wise for him. But other than that, he's had at least 8 fantasy points in every single game since week 5. Every single game since week 5, he's had at least 8 fantasy points, with the exception of this one where they were playing down 2 to 3 scores and they were doing 2-point conversions instead of extra points, scoring touchdowns, going for a 4th down. And I think he's in play. I mean, this doesn't make a ton of sense why I get 1,000 remainder, but this makes you feel a little better about leaving salary on the table and you're not really fading a ton other than a JSN. But point for dollar, I think it's no question Kenneth Walker is a better play than JSN. And I think the difference is getting to JSN if you wanted to, but I just can't fade Kenneth Walker this week. He had 20 back-to-back 20 fantasy point days in the 2 matchups against the Rams, and I'm not messing around with that. But that's all I got for you guys. We appreciate you tuning in. If you've gotten this far, please leave a like. Let us know your stands you're taking this week. Who's some vibes plays that aren't the obvious ones. I want to know how you're going to get different this week, whether it's the showdown, whether it's the main. It doesn't matter. We're going to be playing everything. We usually post lines an hour before lock. So on the first showdown / main before that locks on Sunday afternoon, and then right before the Seattle Rams lock at 5:30, we're going to post our finals, and hopefully it's we go 3 in a row in terms of prospering this week. And it's a really fun weekend in terms of NFL Championship weekend, and I hope that it's really fun and exciting because this has been one of the best playoffs overall that I can remember in some times. Can't thank you guys enough. We got one more to go, and that's going to be our Super Bowl breakdown in a couple of weeks, and then we're going to get into some draft content and stuff like that. So I'm excited. Hope you guys are too, and we will see you guys on the next one.